Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar on private practice business systems. I am Michael Perry. I'm going to go ahead and start the slide deck and move right into the topic for today. Private dental practice business systems are one of a large category of items that exist in the practice management webinar project curriculum. I am Michael Perry. I'm a dentist of 40 years. I've also been a dental practice management consultant for 20 of those 40 years. The business of dentistry has been an interest of mine, and this program is designed to give you an overview of the primary business systems that exist in almost every private practice. This is, as I said, part of our general practice management webinar project curriculum. We've divided the curriculum into 3 general groups. This is one of the basic programs that introduce a large body of subject matter. The brunt of the programs in our curricula are core programs that are specific to subject matters, and then there are a number of advanced programs for those that have had a chance to see the core material. My goal is to provide dentists, primarily practice owners, or those that aspire to dental practice ownership, to the various business systems that you're either dealing with now or you're going to be dealing with. Regardless of the type of dental practice that you have, if you saw the introductory webinar for this whole series, I talked about the 2 practice types that we're using for our categorization: the PPO-based practice, which has 1 or more fee-for-service PPO contracts with third parties, and primarily what go along with those contracts are fee schedules, usually fee schedules that are below the market rate, below UCR, and then each of the insurance companies will have a number of rules that will give guidance and also restrict the activity of the dentist in terms of charging patients and filing claims. I'm contrasting that to what I call the insurance independent practice. That's a practice that has no contracts with third parties. All of the patients are paying market rate. They're paying off of the UCR fee schedule, and the dentist is more free in an entrepreneurial sense. So even though the nomenclature that we use to label each of the systems that I'm going to talk about today is the same, the way that those systems are used is very different in a PPO-based practice versus an insurance independent practice. And before I move on, I should probably state that as a practical matter, there are a whole spectrum of PPO-based practices. There are some practices that exist in the marketplace that maybe only have 1 PPO contract. That's often with Delta Dental, and that might be 50% of the patient base. It might be as low as 25% of the patient base. And so with those practices, a large percentage of the patients are paying off of the UCR fee schedule, as opposed to the purely insurance independent practice where 100% of the patients are paying UCR. This is one of 4 introductory webinars. The specific curriculum here are business systems. The introductory webinars for human resources, which is given by Ali Aramshian. He is what I call a dental attorney, and is of course an expert in California labor law and other HR-based systems. The regulatory compliance introduction is done by Savannah Elliott, who works with Adams Dental Consulting. That is primarily OSHA, HIPAA, and other regulatory systems. And then the marketing introduction was given by Jessica Edgerton, who gives a nice broad overview of marketing. So these three subjects are covered in other introductory webinars, and I won't be talking about those in this program. The green bullets that you see on the screen are each of the systems that I will provide an overview for you in the next 40 minutes or so. Each of these bullets has a specific core training attached to it, and some of them have advanced trainings that follow those. So this will give you a chance to learn what you don't know about each of these subjects. Most of you probably have a basic knowledge of each of these subjects, but there are probably some gaps. So my goal is to have you have a clear understanding of what will be covered in depth on the more specific webinars that are in the core program and in the advanced program. We're going to start with vision development. Vision development is a creative process, sometimes called a right brain activity. We dentists tend to be notorious left-brainers. We tend to be linear thinking. We are, most of us, very organized. Most of us are somewhat perfectionistic. We are used to focusing on details and being very particular about not leaving any gaps. That's why we are able to do our microsurgeries and to take on complex treatment plans for our dental patients. Vision development is very different than microsurgery and dentistry. It's something that most of us spend time thinking about, but rarely actually sit down and go through the process of actually developing a vision. Vision development can be done in an hour or two. It needs to be updated annually. Perhaps an hour spent per year would keep it fresh. This is a process where the dentist has an opportunity to create their outline for their professional life. If you believe that life is not a dress rehearsal and that you only get one pass through as a dental professional, I think it is incumbent upon all of us to create a vision for how we would like our professional life to be. The salient question is, if you could have it any way, how would it be? And if you can ask yourself that question, and then very specifically in a vision statement, state, where would you like to practice? What are the different treatment modalities, types of treatment that you would like to render for patients? What would your physical office look like? Would it be a very large office with many treatment rooms and built like the Taj Mahal? Or would it be something simpler? Maybe something that is in a retail area that is more basic? What would be the characteristics of the patients that you'd like to treat? In my career, I put a lot of energy into patients that were fearful of the dentist, which for many dentists would not be the patient base that they would select. I had my bachelor's degree in psychology. I was interested in dental anxiety, and I found that many of the patients that I treated, once I could gain their confidence and get them relaxed, sometimes sedate them, many of them needed quite a bit in the way of dental care. And so patient characteristics for me were different than many other dentists who were perhaps seeking to focus on aesthetics, seeking to have patients that had ancillary problems such as sleep apnea or TMD type problems. What patient characteristics would you like to focus on? And then the last two are, how much do you want to work and how much do you want to make? If you're clear on how many days a week you'd like to work and actually how many hours in each of those days, if it was ideal, how would it be? Then you can do the math and work out how many days you're actually going to work in a year. And if you say, well, in doing that, I would like my net profit, which is my income minus my expenses, my net profit, I would like it to be a certain amount of money. Let's just say it was $200,000. Then you can take that net profit figure, divide it by the number of days you're going to work in a year, and you know how much you're going to net per day. And then you can interpolate that and know how much you need to make per hour. If you know what your practice overhead is, you know how much income you have to have per day. And therefore, you know how much you have to produce per day in order to be within that vision statement. Now, the left brain activity that goes along with envisioning, it follows envisioning, the vision has to come first, is the business plan. A business plan, first and foremost, has to be in harmony with the vision statement. So many dentists make the mistake of assuming that their circumstances are set. They don't have the ability to have the professional life they'd like to have. They are stuck in whatever circumstances they're in. And so they go directly to the business plan. Be sure to envision first and plan second. Once you have that vision statement, you can create a business plan that has the left brain activity, the objective steps involved that allow you to determine what are going to be the costs of the various components of your plan. And then if you're going to need to use outside sources for the funding of your business plan, it can be a component of your application process. What you see on the screen is the worksheet that I developed for business planning during the business planning webinar, which is in the core part of the core series. I'll be diving into this document in great detail. For now, just as an overview, it starts off with, are you going to be changing your relationship with third-party providers? Your relationship with third-party providers, PPOs and HMOs has a huge effect on the business plan itself. You could argue that it has a dominant effect. So I like to start with that. And then, are we going to be altering staff? We're going to be adding or subtracting staff. And if we are adding or subtracting staff, what training will they need in order to be in line with our vision statement and how we're going to operate? And then, are we going to make physical changes? Are we going to have to capitalize changes in the physical plant? Are we going to purchase equipment? And what are we going to do to attract new patients? Once we have all of that, we can estimate the cost. I like to put together a business plan for 3 years. It's not so far out there that we can't account for the variables that exist in the marketplace. And once we have that business plan together, we can say, are we going to be able to fund it from the money that the practice is already bringing in? Or because we're doing new things, are we going to be able to make more money and fund the business plan from the extra money that we're going to make from the new activities? Or, as dentists very often need to do, are we going to go for outside financing? Are we going to go to a lending institution and borrow money in order to fund the business plan? And if that is the case, then the worksheet itself becomes a component of the borrowing process, of the borrowing application process. Once we have that business plan, it is a simple matter to put a timeline on it. Each of the steps in the business plan needs to be timed in such a way where it's not going to derail or detract from the day-to-day business of the practice. It's not going to create a problem with work-life balance. So, in review, vision statement first, business plan second, action plan third. The reason that I have put PPO transitions into the curriculum and have them as a subgroup of business planning is that very often when I work with dentists, it becomes clear at the very beginning of the process that the relationship that many dentists have with third parties, with insurance companies, with PPO contracts, sometimes HMO contracts, it is not in line with their vision of the way they want things to be. When I was a dental student, I believe I was contracted with Delta Dental before I even finished dental school, or certainly Delta Dental came and spoke to my dental school class, and most of us contracted with Delta Dental right then and there, not knowing anything about PPO contracts and the rules that we were going to be practicing under. Now, I graduated from dental school in 1979. The dental marketplace and the relationship with third parties was very different in 1979 than it is today. But the principles are the same. And it's important that if you have a relationship with PPOs that for whatever reason is not in line with your vision of the way that you want to practice, very often a PPO transition has to be done before you can even put the business plan together. And so I decided that that was an important enough issue to have a complete training on PPO transitions. If you are in a situation where you have relationships with third parties that are not part of your vision, it's probably going to be important before you go through the other components of the business plan, develop the other portions of the business plan, that you clarify your position in the marketplace. Do you want to do a PPO transition? Is it feasible for you to do a PPO transition? Is it reasonably safe for you to do a PPO transition? In my training course on PPO transitions, I'll give you the methodology where you can determine these things. Okay, we're moving on to leadership. I've been teaching leadership to dentists for 20 years, and I will tell you, of all of the business systems that I have taught, leadership has been the most difficult for me. A big reason for that is dentists do not receive any business leadership training at all in dental school. As a matter of fact, the academics that train them in dental school also don't have any training in business leadership. Business leadership primarily comes from business school training. And so what happens is the skill set of the dentist is used in a creative manner, and you might say a random manner, and the leadership that comes out of that sometimes is effective, but very often, unfortunately, is not effective. So the business leadership program that I have in this practice management webinar project is specifically designed for private dental practice owners. It's not for someone to run General Motors. It's not for someone who wants to scale and have a large number of dental office locations. It is specific to the dental practice owner and the challenges that that person deals with a small staff in a private practice business. What I find, and I do have a resource which is in the resource area of my website. I wrote an article many years ago on my experience with different types of business leadership that have occurred in dentistry or that are occurring now. Part of that comes from my own life's experience. My father was a pediatric dentist who was in practice before I was born, and I used to spend time in his dental practice and didn't realize it then, but I was getting an education in how dental practices were led back in the 50s and 60s. Then I became a partner in a group practice in the 1980s in Orange County and had a chance to see how leadership was done at that time in that group. And then in 1988, I became a practice owner where I live now in Santa Rosa. I've lived in Santa Rosa for the last 30 years and took over an existing practice in Santa Rosa, which was very PPO based. Over the years, I changed it to an insurance independent practice, and I had to lead that process along the way. And I learned through the School of Hard Knocks that there are systems that work well in dental practice leadership and those that don't. The authoritarian model was largely what my father used. I think that was common in the 50s and 60s, sometimes called the military model. And I think the name itself paints a fairly clear picture. The family model was popular when I was first in practice. That's what existed in the group practice that I was in my early years in practice. The only problem is if it's a family, it's kind of hard to hold people accountable, or at the extreme to terminate them if they're a member of your family. It's kind of hard to terminate your sister-in-law. And so my favorite method of dental practice leadership is leadership by facilitation. That doesn't mean that it's not a democratic system. Your employees don't get to vote on decisions that you're going to make, but you certainly want to tap into their knowledge and wisdom, and you want them to know that you respect their opinion. And that style of leadership is described in that resource, which you can access. Once you're done with this webinar, I recommend that you go and download that resource and read that section on leadership strategies. So patient scheduling sounds like a very simple thing. And once you have the appropriate scheduling system for the type of practice that you have, it is a fairly simple thing. Scheduling in a dental practice, at least a practice that is fee for service. Now, all PPOs are fee for service. And of course, if you are charging patients UCR, that's fee for service. The only remuneration system in dentistry that is not fee for service is the HMO system. The HMO system is based upon you getting paid a fixed amount of money per month to take care of a certain population. It's a common in the medical model, but PPO systems are simply discounted fee-for-service systems. Sometimes I'll hear a dentist say, "Oh, I'm going to take my practice fee-for-service." I think it's a misunderstanding of the nomenclature. Fee-for-service means simply what it says, that when you provide an individual service, whether it be a Class II composite or an adult pro fee, those services are paid for individually. That's what fee-for-service means. And so in a fee-for-service model, you have a whole variety of services that are priced either through a market-based fee schedule, which is your UCR fee schedule, or they're priced through a fixed fee schedule that's created through a PPO contract. And usually that fee schedule is going to be discounted below UCR. That's not always true, but most of the time PPO fee schedules are discounted below UCR, very often substantially below UCR. And so when you are scheduling, if you are going to have a balanced day in terms of production in the dental office is measured in dollars. And there are procedures that per hour produce more dollars than other procedures. If you look at the fundamental services that a dental hygienist provides, you could say the fundamental services are adult pro fee, periodontal maintenance, or scaling and root planing. Now, hygienists certainly do a lot more than those three things, but that's a large majority of the procedures that they do daily. Most of them are one of those three things. But the level of production for each of those is very different. The adult pro fee tends to be low production. The periodontal maintenance for many offices you might call medium production, and the scaling and root planing would be considered high production. In restorative dentistry, and a comprehensive exam is low production. Many operative procedures such as posterior composites are medium production, and crown and bridge or implant restorative, those are high production. And so in a patient scheduling scheme, in order to have a balanced day and have production that is healthy on a regular basis, we have to mix the low production, the medium production, and the high production together. So scheduling in a dental practice is not just filling in blanks. It is balancing the schedule so you have certainly you're always going to have some low production procedures, but those are mixed in with the medium and high production procedures, and balanced in such a way where the production goals of the office can be met on a regular basis. In PPO-based practices, the patients themselves tend to be very insurance-minded. Patients that are regulars in practices that are dominated by PPO fee schedules tend to do a lot of smaller procedures. It's not always true, but on average, they're going to be doing a greater number of smaller procedures. And it is not unusual for a PPO-based practice to have multiple patients that are actually in the treatment rooms at the same time. Those practices tend to have larger, busier staffs, and the ancillary services that are provided by auxiliaries are utilized to the maximum in PPO-based practices. And so the management of a PPO-based patient schedule is it's a puzzle that has a lot of smaller pieces to it, as opposed to the insurance independent practice, which tends to do more dentistry on fewer people. The patient base is less oriented toward insurance benefits and more oriented toward efficiency. They'd rather come in and sit for a longer period of time and not come in as often. Those practices also tend to do more high-end procedures on average that are more productive in terms of the dollars produced. And so block booking, which is just a phrase that's attached to the balance in terms of production of low, medium, and high production procedures, doesn't look the same in a PPO-based practice as it does in an insurance independent practice. And my colleague Ashley Adams is in the core curriculum will do a much deeper dive into scheduling strategies, particularly as they relate to PPO-based practices. It is often a mistake in private practice to mix together different concepts around the collection of money. In my way of thinking about the collection of money, which is also called income, it's also called revenue, this is the component of the practice that drives it as a business. The financial policy itself divides into two important subgroups. If I'm talking about a general practice, as opposed to some types of specialty practices, about a third of the revenue in a typical general practice is going to come over the counter. And what I mean by over the counter is there isn't a fee quotation and an arrangement made. Over-the-counter services are not generally treatment planned. Most over-the-counter services are part of the recall system. A person might come in for an appointment with a dental hygienist where their radiographs are going to be updated. They are going to have their periodontal chart updated. They are going to have an adult prophy, and they're going to have an examination with the doctor. And all of that's going to occur in 1 hour. They will then go to the front desk and they will pay for those services over the counter, just as if they had gone to a hair salon. There was no financial arrangement about the cost of those services ahead of time. If the patient has a dental plan, whether or not the practice is contracted with the dental plan, if there are dental benefits, then very often the over-the-counter collection is only for the portion of the total that is not covered by the dental benefit. Now, many of you know that if you're an insurance independent practice and you're not contracted with Delta Dental, the Delta Dental does not assign benefits to out-of-network providers. So if it's a Delta Dental patient in an insurance independent practice, the over-the-counter collections is the entire amount, because the dental benefit is going to be sent from Delta Dental directly to the patient. So over-the-counter collections are for procedures that are not treatment planned. They would also include most emergency care, but they're not going to include operative procedures, surgical procedures, procedures that are treatment planned by the dentist and organized in such a way where fee quotations and financial arrangements are occurring. So that gets us to the second bullet. Financial arrangement options for most general practices on average are about 2/3 of the collections that occur in the practice. And in my opinion, it's very important to not mix and confuse over the counter from financial arrangements. My preference is to look at them as two completely different revenue systems with completely different rules attached to them. With financial arrangements, anytime you have a treatment plan, which could be for non-surgical periodontal treatment, scaling and root planing, which might include site-specific antimicrobials or other treatment modalities, that would be treatment planned. That would have a financial arrangement attached to it. Operative procedures, crown and bridge, surgical procedures, those are all procedures that are treatment planned. There is a fee quotation. If it is appropriate, there is an estimate of dental benefits, and all of that is put together and via the practice financial policy, which is the list of options that patients have to pay for services via financial arrangement. Most dental practices, most general practices have 3, 4, or 5 options for payment. They could include a prepayment where the patient is paying in advance and receiving some small discount. They can include a pay-as-you-go option where the patient is paying for the treatment over the duration of the treatment period, as long as they've completed payment when the treatment is done. There could be some form of internal financing, which is anytime the patient is allowed to make payments after the treatment is complete. Then very, very often in general practice today, there are external financing options, which includes CareCredit and other third parties, where CareCredit is charging either the patient or the practice or both a fee to set up a loan, and then payments are made by the patient to the loan company. There's a last option called advance payments, where a patient will put money on account, and when they get to a certain account balance, they will, the dentist will go ahead and start treatment. That option is often used for patients that are not able to qualify for third-party financing. So financial arrangements includes that financial policy and the list of options that exist in a particular practice. That is contrasted to over-the-counter, which is items that are paid for at the time the service is offered. Now, in my parents' time, and this is something that has continued in some dental practices even to today, is what I call a statement-based system. Statement-based systems are systems where there are no over-the-counter collections. Insurance claims are filed. If the insurance monies are assigned to the dental practice, the practice takes those monies, but all of the payments that come from patients are via statements that are sent to them. And so the payment for services is not at the time of service. I will just make a blanket statement that statement-based systems, I think, are antiquated. They're very expensive to administer, and with today's technology, they're just unnecessary. I think it's a good idea for practices to have statements in their toolbox. There are certainly exceptions where a statement is going to be a good tool for patient communication, but we don't want it to be a dominant part of the collection system. And then finally, collections of past due accounts. Oftentimes, practices that are going through a transition, and perhaps they've had a statement-based system, perhaps their financial policy system was not well organized, and their accounts receivable is not in a healthy place. For a general practice, as an average number, I like to see the accounts receivable sitting at about 3 to 5 weeks of production. If it's less than 3 weeks, the practice financial policy may be too strict. If it's more than 5 weeks, the collection system is not efficient. But at any rate, if we have a problem with the accounts receivable and the past due accounts totals are too large, there's a specific system that needs to be implemented to collect those past due accounts. And that's not part of the financial policy. Collections of past due accounts is a separate system, and we do have a webinar training in the practice management webinar project specific to that for any practices that are having problems with past due accounts. So if you look at your accounts receivable and you see that it's more than 5 weeks production, and this is for a general practice now, you probably have an accounts receivable issue, and you would benefit from the collection of past due accounts webinar that we have in our curriculum. Okay, management of dental benefits. Whether or not you are PPO based or insurance independent, you are going to be dealing with dental benefits. Just because a practice is insurance independent doesn't mean as an ancillary service, as a value added service, that practice is not going to help patients maximize their return from their dental benefits plan. I think patients expect that value added service, and it's a very rare practice that doesn't offer it. First and foremost, the mechanics of claims filing in the digital age has changed dramatically. Savannah Elliott has a very nice core program on just the basic process of filing a claim and using the claim form in the proper way, having the billing entity and the providing entity properly represented on the claim form. And there are not only efficiency issues about that, there are definitely legal issues about that, both in terms of civil law, in terms of claims filing, but most practices that have PPO contracts also have agreed contractually to file claims in a certain way. It's interesting that Delta Dental requires all of their providing doctors. If you are contracted with Delta Dental, you are bound by contract to file a claim for every dental service that you provide on a patient that has a Delta plan, even if there's no benefit for it, even if it's a service that has been provided after the annual maximum was reached, or even if it's a service that's not covered at all by the plan. You are bound by contract to file a claim for everything that you do. Many of the other PPOs are not as strict about that. but just realize that Delta has some very specific rules that are in the fine print of their contract that must be followed. And then in addition, I deliver a program myself called the Insurance Narrative System. When you are filing claims in today's world, the rules for declaring something as medically necessary and therefore something that is going to receive a benefit if that particular service is a benefit of that plan. A narrative that's filed with the initial claim is going to be very important for getting the dental benefits paid on the patient's behalf. And since the patient's expectation in their financial arrangement very often is that those dental benefits will be paid, it ends up having a huge effect on the relationship with the patient. And so what goes out with the initial claim, the language and the narrative that goes out with the initial claim, and particularly with about half a dozen codes that dental benefit companies tend to be very sensitive about. If that information is not properly sent with the initial claim, then you are in a much more difficult situation if you need to make secondary efforts later in order to get the claim paid. So the insurance narrative system is a very important system for any private practice. It's particularly important for insurance independent practices because in insurance independent practices, those that are not contracted with Delta Dental, since the monies that are being paid out by Delta Dental are not being assigned to the practice, they're going directly to the patient. It is very important that the narrative is robust so the patient will get paid as predicted. Moving on to treatment planning and case presentation, I am a believer in having an ideal treatment plan for every patient. And this would be true regardless of whether you're PPO-based or insurance independent or somewhere in the middle. What we know is that new patients that come into the practice very frequently, I'm going to say the majority of the time, are going to benefit from dental services. It is unusual for a new patient to come into a practice that's not going to benefit from any dental services. And many patients that come in to a practice have immediate wants and needs, things that they consider to be an emergency, you would consider to be an emergency. And when you have someone who's entering your practice under those circumstances, they are most of the time not interested in long-term planning. They're not interested in a long-term vision for their dental health or their dental circumstances. They are focused on having their immediate want or need taken care of. So I am well aware that when an emergency patient arrives in the office, that the emergency needs to be taken care of first, usually for health reasons, but also that's your initial entry into relationship building with the patient. But once you are past that, and once you are in a situation where there aren't any immediate wants or needs, a process of building a relationship with the patient, understanding what their goals are, so those goals can be added to your goals as their dentist, and then taking them through the 7-step process that you see outlined on the screen. It is a methodology that's been proved over many, many years, and it can only be done successfully if the dentist is willing to create an ideal treatment plan for that patient. Ideal treatment plans are very often not accepted in their entirety right away. It is not unusual for a patient with an ideal treatment plan to decide that they are only going to have a portion of the treatment done. That's okay. Anything that they don't do in the first round of treatment becomes part of the practice inventory. It's sitting in the patient's chart. And it is a lot easier to talk to a patient about something that you have already discussed with them in the past, as opposed to bringing up something that's brand new, particularly during a recall exam when time is very short. So I advocate that the dentist or a highly trained staff member interview each new patient once their emergency needs are handled, and come to understand what the patient's goals are in terms of saving their teeth, in terms of function, in terms of their appearance. Because once we know that the patient has goals that go beyond just their dental health, then we can create a treatment plan that includes the appropriate treatment for their goals, as well as the basic goals that you would have as their dentist. Once we know what their goals are and we are clear, we want to be sure we have the patient's permission to put together an ideal treatment plan. It is a permission statement, is an agreement between the dentist and the patient that the patient will be informed of everything that the dentist has identified for their dental health, but also includes anything that would apply to the patient's goals. And so it becomes a discussion with the patient of, we're just talking here. We're just having a discussion, so you have the information that you need to make the right decisions that you need to make at this time. Any treatment that you are going to have done, the timing of that treatment is completely up to you. Once I have that permission statement, I know I can tip that patient back and I can go through my data collection process and my treatment planning process, whether that treatment planning is done as I'm looking in the patient's mouth or if it's done later at my desk. That treatment plan is going to include everything that I see that they would benefit from in terms of their dental health, and it's going to include everything that they've stated that I learned in the initial interview in relation to their goals. Once I have gone through those first three steps, the interview, the permission statement, and the treatment planning, the ideal treatment planning, the process splits. You have administrative people who are going to be experts in fee quotation, dental benefit analysis, financial arrangements, and scheduling. All of those things are going to be done by a staff person. So if it's one of those times, and this would be 80% of the time in my former practice, where we are going to take them all the way through the 7 steps on the same visit, then while I am doing step 4, which is the explanation to the patient of the treatment plan, that explanation to the patient is going on while the administrative team is processing the treatment plan and preparing to have a financial discussion and an organizational discussion around the timing of treatment. Explanation to the patient needs to be done succinctly. One of my mentors used to say that dentists love to spend 3 minutes selling their dentistry and the next 10 buying it back. Dentists tend to be way too technical and spend way too much time talking to patients about specific details rather than talking in lay people's terms and being succinct. And so while that explanation goes on, the administrative team is preparing to go to step 5, which is quotation of the fee. And then the quotation of the fee is going to lead into a negotiation, which is a series of steps around estimating dental benefits, determining what is the timing of the treatment going to be. Is the treatment going to be done as quickly and efficiently as it can? It's all going to be planned for right away, or is the treatment going to be segmented? Is it going to be a plan where it's scattered over a number of years with the goal of maximizing dental benefits over that time? And of course, the nature of the treatment plan is going to have a huge effect on that timing. If it's a garden variety treatment plan involving mostly non-surgical periodontal treatment and operative dentistry, that could be stretched out even over a number of years. If it's a treatment plan that's involving immediate dentures, that option is not there. Once the treatment is started, we have to take it right to the end in an efficient manner. And then the financial arrangement lines up with what I stated on the earlier slide about the financial policy. Anytime you have a treatment plan, you are going to make a financial arrangement utilizing one of the options that's in your financial policy. Does your financial policy have 3, 4, or 5 options? Depending upon the number of options and the priorities, those options are going to be offered to the patient in sequence, and the patient will choose one of those options. And once that arrangement is made, then the scheduling process via your block booking system can be initiated. Now, the dental hygiene department, as I have often stated, is a huge part of a general practice in a business sense. This would also be true, of course, of periodontist practices. The recall program and the active treatment for periodontitis that goes on in the hygiene department creates about a third of the revenue that comes into the practice. So in a typical practice that is of average size, this practice might have one dentist and one full-time hygienist. It's about 1/3, 2/3 between the revenue that comes from hygiene and the revenue that comes from services that the doctor is providing. As the practice grows, the patient base becomes bigger and the hygiene department becomes larger, the percentage of revenue coming from the hygiene department in many practices grows to where it's more than a third of the revenue that exists. The hygiene department, because of modern science and because of modern digital systems, has become much more complicated. This is a subject that, in my opinion, requires a number of trainings that are viewed in sequence, and implementation has to be carried out as the practitioner goes through the various trainings. What is done organizationally in the hygiene department in a PPO-based practice is very different than what occurs in insurance independent practice. That's because what occurs in the hygiene department has to be aligned with the CDT coding system and the rules in the various PPO contracts that exist in the practice. That limits the services that the hygienist can provide and the amount of time that she or he can spend providing those services. That's just a practical reality in a PPO-based practice, as opposed to an insurance independent practice, which is much more free to set up the systems independently of the codes. That doesn't mean the insurance independent practice doesn't work to maximize benefits and doesn't file claims. That's not true at all. But the insurance independent practice is much more free to gain clinical alignment among the providers and provide services in such a way where they feel it's ideal for the patient, unencumbered by PPO contracts. So this is a large body of material that there's a huge opportunity for practice owners to tap into, mostly for the benefit of patients, but also for the financial health of the practice itself. There are multiple trainings in the core material of our practice management webinar project, and there's also an advanced training that I provide in the advanced segment of the curriculum. Overhead management. The typical efficient general practice, and once again, that generic general practice, one dentist, one dental hygienist, working 4 days a week, we would see, if that practice is well run, an overhead that is approximately 70% of the income that comes into the practice. In other words, 70% of collections. Depending upon the size of the practice, once you add associates, certainly at the various specialty practices, those numbers are going to change. But regardless of the type of practice that exists, management of the overhead is critical to the profitability of the practice. It doesn't do any good to be very productive if your overhead is out of control. If your overhead is out of control and you're very productive, you're still not going to have healthy profitability. In order to have healthy profitability, we have to be productive and at the same time have proper management of the overhead. The three documents that are generally produced for dentists by CPAs. Most practice owners work with a CPA, and most CPAs, unfortunately, tend to speak to their clients, their dentist clients, in CPA lingo. If you were to talk to your CPA about a dental treatment plan and use technical terminology as if you were talking to a dentist, you might have some sense of what I see as the communication is going from CPA to dentist about their the financial status of the practice. So in my opinion, the standard documents that come from CPAs and go to their clients, which I've seen organized in a myriad of different ways. I'm not sure I've ever seen two CPAs organize an income statement the same way. They all seem to do it differently. In this program, which I deliver myself, I show the dentist what I call a template for an income statement. An income statement, by the way, is the same thing as a profit and loss statement. It's the same document. So when you're getting your P&L from your CPA, you need to be able to read it. You need to be able to understand what's there, and you need to be able to make decisions from it. You need to have a budget that is attached to that profit and loss statement, so you know when you look at a particular line item whether your spending is in line with what's appropriate. So the template and the training that goes along with it helps in general doctors understand how much they should be spending in the different spending categories. It divides it up in such a way where it's easy to understand, and it's not in CPA lingo, it is in dentist lingo. Now, the balance sheet that most CPAs supply with the P&L is simply assets and liabilities. It shows how much money do you have, either in terms of money itself or other assets that are worth money, and then how much do you owe? How much do you have in terms of practice loans or other forms of financing that you've used, even credit cards that are business credit cards? So assets and liabilities, are you in the red or are you in the black? The profit and loss statement doesn't give you that information. Now also realize that because of accounting rules, there are relationships between the income statement and the balance sheet that need to be understood, and those relationships are taught in the overhead management course. There are things that you buy, pieces of equipment, or things that you build, which can include cabinets or carpet on the floor, that appear on the income statement in one form and on the balance sheet in another form. I don't know that a CPA would be comfortable with that description that I just gave, but in talking to dentists, it is an easy description for them to understand. So income statements are a little bit like radiographs, and balance sheet are a little bit like perio charts. They provide different data sets. They go together. When you put them together, they give you a big picture and allow you to do planning, but they are not the same thing. They work in concert with one another and in harmony with one another. Now, the third document, the cash flow analysis, is something that is usually only supplied by a CPA if it's requested from the dentist. I like a cash flow analysis because it shows that the doctor has enough money flowing through the system in order for the system to survive day to day. If I have a young doctor who has a lot of debt, and because they have a lot of debt, they're making a lot of loan payments in addition to the overhead that exists in the practice, they generally have a very tight cash flow. If their income drops significantly in a short period of time, they may not have enough money flowing through the system to make their loan payments. So I call that a cash flow problem. So cash flow is a little bit like a measure, it's a little bit like a pulse oximeter. Do you have enough oxygen flowing through the system in order for the system to survive? So a cash flow analysis is very important for a practice where there's significant debt or there are any issues of money management. If a practitioner has very low debt and they can survive a significant downturn in their practice, the cash flow analysis is less important. But for many, many dentists, particularly in today's world, particularly those younger dentists that may have education debt that they're still dealing with, a cash flow analysis is a very important third document in the overhead management process. So I want to thank you for sticking with me through this general overview. At the very least, from this program, you now have a sense of what you don't know or what you didn't know before you saw the program. And you have a sense of what you're going to be diving into as you move into the core curriculum. You may not have had a chance to see the other introductory webinars yet, the one on human resources, the one on government regulations, or the one on marketing. So you want to be sure to watch those before you go into the core curriculum. But once you've seen all of those introductory webinars, you're going to have a really good sense of the scope of the entire project, and you'll probably have a sense of where your strengths and weaknesses lie. So I want to thank you for your attention, and we are going to see you in a future webinar.